Now, if you're living in a part of the country where it gets cold in the winter, snows, whatever, goes below freezing even, what happens is if you might want to paint during that time. And I wanted to share some tips. And this is an old video that I pulled some footage out of. Guy is trying to paint his Triumph track bike as we speak in some really cold weather, only he has a heated garage. Well, some of us don't, including me and including Luciano, of course. And we've managed to come up with some tips, some information that may be really useful if you're trying to paint in cold weather. Keep in mind there's some rules of engagement in cold weather that you want to be aware of right in the beginning. The first one is paint takes a lot longer to dry in cold weather. And among other things, you want to have the parts prepped, etched, primed, and then bring them hopefully into a warmer area. Let everything get warm before you take it out in the cold. The one thing you don't want to do is leave a part in the cold garage, so that when you're painting onto an ice cold piece of steel or metal of any kind, what happens, you tend to trap moisture under the primer, under the paint. And that would be really, this is 101 information on this video. Not a lot of high-tech stuff, basic information. And I used the Green Ninja as the video that shared a lot of the information that I think will be useful. Now, we have to deal with cold weather here maybe 3 or 4 months of the year. I don't like to paint in the summer because I like to ride. And when it gets too cold to ride, or it snows, or they salt the roads, that's a great time to spend time painting. Or you don't tend to rush through things. Let every coat of paint dry if you can. And of course, everybody's going to have a different shop scenario, but I wanted to show some footage of some of the paint work we did on this bike. And to be honest, it came out pretty good.
Thinner takes a lot longer to outgas. And no matter what paint you're using, whether it's primer, color, or clear, in cold weather, especially if you let it dry in a cold garage like I do overnight, what you find out is instead of drying or getting dry to the touch in a very few minutes, sometime 20 minutes, half an hour, well, in cold weather, sometime that becomes 2 or 3 hours. Well, but it'll still dry. It's just not convenient. Now, I've talked to people that own body shops, and they tell me what I'm doing, it can't be done, it's impossible, and well, I don't know, but the paint seems to dry eventually. But there's tips along the way, and the biggest one is to let everything you do dry. In my case, I'm never in a rush to do this. If you look outside, you can see I'm not going riding when this is over, so I can afford to let it dry overnight. When you're mixing primer, put the primer on in thin coats, not one big thick coat. That seems to help. When you're painting color, in this case we were doing the Camaro green, let each coat, put 3 thin coats on instead of 1 thick coat until it's just the right color. Thin coats, let it dry between coats till you can touch it. And in the best of all worlds, let every coat, when you move to the next step, dry overnight, unless you're in a hurry. Now, I always let stuff dry in my garage where it's ambient temperature overnight before I bring it into the house. But then when I bring it into the house, I put it up by a heating vent and let it sit there at least a couple of days before I even touch it, and definitely not sand it, because that paint is going to be soft. When it dries in cold weather, a lot of times you gain a little bit of gloss in the paint because it'll lay down nice, but it's not a winning combination. If you're in a rush to buff it out, you find out it takes a lot longer to buff it out. When you do the clear, and I've used many different brands of clear, the 4-to-1 clear, anytime I've put on 1 or 2 very thick coats, it takes forever to dry it, and you get frustrated, and then you start trying to rush it. The best tip, and it's a good tip, just put on thin coats. And in the case of clear, I'll give you an example. If you put on a coat right after you go out into the shop, go up, have a cup of coffee, make a couple phone calls if you have to, or do some laundry or whatever. Don't just stand there looking at it waiting for it to dry. And that's what I do. And by letting it dry, by letting the coats in between dry, and not rushing, it's the biggest temptation is you always think, well, I painted this in the summer and a day later I could buff it out. Well, in this kind of weather, that's not really going to happen. But you can still, the point that I'm trying to make is, and I'm a driven person, when I decide I want to do something, I try not to let anything get in my way, especially the weather. And I listen to the weatherman, and he says, oh, it's going to be below freezing. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. I still want to get something painted. In the case of this, when this video was shot, we were in between snowstorms. You can see how much snow is there. And I still got this restoration done. And what happens, you tough it out all winter. You fight tooth and nail through this weather. But in the spring, the first day the spring flowers come out, and you're out on the open road with the bike that's perfectly buffed out and everything's shiny. And then you look back, if you've shot pictures or video of it, you look back at a day like today and you have a good laugh, because you really can do this despite what people and professional people tell you. You still can do this. So the bottom line is, if you're willing to put up with being cold and being damp, and my suggestion, if you are, drink some extra coffee, especially if you drink coffee between coats. Because when I decided to do this restoration, I had no choice. I don't want to use up my riding time in the summer to paint. So I try to do all my painting, virtually all of it, unless it's for a friend or an emergency, that we repair track bikes that went down, and for several people. But I try to plan out my cold winter when I'm really not enthusiastic about riding. I don't have to ride every day. And knowing that if I tough it out over this winter time, I'm going to be facing spring when the snow all melts and the weather warms up. I'm going to have a freshly restored bike. And that's what happened with this bike. And there was several other things: polishing the swing arm, painting the wheels, making a new seat for the bike. But the painting, had I let the painting go till spring, and so I'd be out in nice warm weather, well, I wouldn't have had the bike ready to ride in the spring. So it's really a trade-off, and it's a trade-off that over the years I've been willing to make, because if I'm not restoring this and I'm not working on something out in my cold garage, well, I can't ride either. So or what'll happen is Karen will find some project for me to work on around the house, and sometimes we have to balance that very, very carefully. You never really know. But I know that you can paint in the winter. I know, and I've talked to many of the people, even where I buy the body shop supplies, they've told me, you didn't really care, it's got to be 72 degrees, and they're probably right. And I'm not trying to poo-poo what professionals say. But remember, what the difference is, a professional person has to do it in a very set amount of time so they can make money. When you're doing a motorcycle restoration, you're doing a labor of love. You can't count the hours, or your wife would shoot you. You've got to face this, that you've got to do it when you're physically able to do it. And in my case, that usually means in the middle of the winter, or when the weather is so bad. And in our part of the country, once it snows, they salt the roads so you can't even ride, even when the snow melts. So, but I know from having done it many, many times that if I tough it out on those cold days, and at the end of that brutal winter, and I've gone through a lot of brutal winters, when that springtime comes and that bike is all buffed out and it's sitting out in the driveway or whatever, and I'm just waiting to see who's riding or if we're going to meet at Choppers or what, I know I look back at that cold day and I don't think about the pain at all. It's like it just goes away. Once you have that bike and it's done and it's polished, you hit the starter and you forget all about that brutal winter. And this bike is a perfect example, because I have two of these, and I built this bike from parts from two separate bikes. And of course I have a lot of spare parts, including an extra spare set of bodywork. So who knows what's coming in the future. I've thought about making this a Red Ninja and some other evil twin combination. But for right now, the way this worked out, I could not have been happier with this restoration.
Now, if you're new to our channel, we have a very, very eclectic channel. One of the new features we have now is some of the videos are grouped into groups that you can access all the videos for one category in one mouse click. And it should be very convenient and very handy. Just check out to feature on the main screen playlists. And thanks to everybody for supporting the channel. We appreciate your support, and it makes this channel possible with all the things we do, the painting, the wheels, the polishing. And please take a second or two and hit the like button. And thanks everyone for watching.